The Kamikaze came out of nowhere. I was hunched over my M1 Garand, trying to dig deeper into the coral that passed for cover on this godforsaken island, when the screaming started. Not human screaming, engine screaming. That high-pitched whine of a Nakajima Ki-43 Oscar fighter diving straight down from the gray April sky, its engine pushed beyond all limits, heading directly for our destroyer USS Bush, anchored 300 yards offshore. I'm Corporal James Jimmy McKenzie, 1st Marine Division, 1st Battalion, 5th Marine Regiment. 22 years old from Cedar Rapids, Iowa, and on April 6, 1945, I was learning that Okinawa would be different from every other Pacific battle we'd fought. This wasn't going to be another quick island hop. This was going to be hell itself. The Oscar hit the bush amidships with a sound like the world cracking open. Orange flame shot 200 feet into the air, followed by a column of black smoke that stained the morning sky. Even from my position on the beach, I could feel the heat wash over my face. The concussion knocked coral chips into my eyes and left my ears ringing like church bells. Shouted Private Bobby Hernandez from San Antonio, pressed into the coral beside me. They're really doing it. They're really flying their planes right into our ships. I wiped coral dust from my eyes and tried to process what I'd just witnessed. We'd heard rumors about these suicide attacks, kamikaze, the Japanese called them, meaning divine wind. But seeing it happen, watching a human being deliberately fly his aircraft into certain death just to sink one of our ships, was something else entirely. That was my introduction to Operation Iceberg, the largest Pacific campaign of World War II, and what would become the bloodiest battle in the Pacific theater. What I didn't know that morning, crouched in coral rubble while Japanese pilots turned themselves into guided missiles, was that I was witnessing the opening moves of an 82-day nightmare that would cost more American lives than any other Pacific battle. 3 weeks earlier, I'd been aboard the attack transport USS Hendry, part of Task Force 51, watching the largest naval armada in Pacific War history converge on the Ryukyu Islands. Admiral Raymond Spruance commanded over 1,300 ships carrying 183,000 assault troops, 4 Army divisions, and 3 Marine divisions, supported by the British Pacific Fleet's Task Force 57. The numbers were staggering, but so was our objective. Okinawa sat just 350 miles south of mainland Japan, perfectly positioned as a staging area for Operation Downfall, the planned invasion of Japan itself. The island was 60 miles long and 18 miles wide, defended by Lieutenant General Mitsuru Ushijima's 32nd Army, 120,000 Japanese troops, supported by 39,000 Okinawan conscripts, and an unknown number of civilians. "This is it, boys," our company commander, Captain Harold Morrison from Portland, Oregon, had told us during a briefing on March 30th. "Okinawa is the last stepping stone to Japan. Take this island, and we can end this war." Standing on the deck of the Hendry that morning, watching the pre-invasion bombardment light up the southern end of Okinawa like a 4th of July show, I believed him. We all did. After victories at Guadalcanal, Tarawa, Saipan, Iwo Jima, after 3.5 years of island hopping across the Pacific, how hard could one more island be? The naval bombardment was the heaviest in Pacific War history. Admiral William Bull Halsey's 3rd Fleet and Admiral Mark Mitcher's Task Force 58 had been pounding Okinawan defenses for a week. Battleships USS New York, USS Nevada, USS West Virginia, and 7 others hurled 16-inch shells into suspected Japanese positions. The cruisers joined in with 8-inch guns, while destroyers crept close to shore to rake the beaches with 5-inch fire. From our transport, it looked like we were obliterating everything on the southern end of the island. Smoke columns rose from dozens of locations. Secondary explosions sent fireballs climbing into the sky. The constant rumble of naval gunfire was so loud we had to shout to be heard. "Ain't gonna be much left for us to fight," said Sergeant Mike O'Connell from Boston, a veteran of Guadalcanal who'd been with the 1st Marines since the beginning. "Navy's gonna blow every on that island to kingdom come." I nodded, checking my gear for the 100th time. M1 Garand rifle, 96 rounds of 30-6 ammunition in 8-round clips, 4 Mark II fragmentation grenades, a K-bar knife, first aid kit, and 2 days' worth of sea rations. Standard assault load for a Marine rifleman, carried by thousands of us packed into transports, stretching to every horizon. The bombardment continued through the night of March 31st. None of us slept much, partly from excitement, partly from the constant thunder of naval guns, but mostly from fear. We'd all heard the casualty reports from Iwo Jima, where 6,800 Americans had died taking an island 8 square miles in size. Okinawa was 60 times larger, with a much bigger garrison. At 0400 hours on April 1, 1945, Easter Sunday, the bombardment reached a crescendo. Every gun in the fleet seemed to be firing at once. The entire southern horizon flickered with muzzle flashes like heat lightning. The sound was beyond description, a continuous roar that seemed to come from the earth itself. "This is it," Captain Morrison shouted over the din. "H hour is 0830. First wave hits the beaches in 4.5 hours. I looked around at the faces of my squad, kids mostly, 18 and 19 years old from small towns across America. Bobby Hernandez had worked in his father's garage. Danny Walsh from Buffalo had been a high school football player. Tommy Chen from San Francisco was studying to be an engineer before the war started. Now we were all Marines, part of the 1st Battalion, 5th Marine Regiment, 1st Marine Division, preparing to assault the beaches of Okinawa. At 0600 hours, we climbed down cargo nets into our LCVP landing craft, Higgins boats. We called them, after their designer Andrew Higgins. 36 men packed into each boat, rifles between our knees, trying not to think about what waited for us on the beaches. The sea was rougher than expected. Our Higgins boat pitched and rolled as we formed up with the rest of the assault wave. I could see dozens of other landing craft around us, all heading toward the same objective, the Hagushi beaches on Okinawa's western coast, just south of the Kadena airfield. "Remember," shouted our boat team leader, Corporal Steve Martinez from El Paso, "the Japs are gonna throw everything they got at us the minute we hit the beach. Keep your heads down and move fast." But as we approached the shore, something seemed wrong. The Japanese weren't firing. No artillery, no mortars, no machine guns. The beaches looked empty except for scattered debris from the naval bombardment. At exactly 0830 hours, the ramp of our Higgins boat dropped down, and we charged into knee-deep surf toward the black sand beaches of Okinawa. I expected to hear the crack of rifle fire, the whistle of incoming shells, the deadly chatter of Japanese machine guns. Instead, I heard only the sound of landing craft engines and Marines splashing through the surf. "Where are they?" Bobby Hernandez shouted as we reached the beach. "Where are the Japs?" The beaches were deserted. No Japanese soldiers, no defensive positions, no resistance at all. We advanced inland expecting an ambush at every step, but found only empty trenches and abandoned positions. By noon, we'd secured the Kadena and Yonton airfields without firing a shot. "I don't like this," Sergeant O'Connell said as we dug in for the night near Kadena airfield. "The Japs ain't stupid. They're up to something." He was right. What we didn't know was that General Ushijima had made a radical strategic decision. Instead of defending the beaches, where American naval gunfire and air power gave us overwhelming advantages, he'd withdrawn his forces to the southern end of the island, to a series of fortified ridges and escarpments that would become known as the Shuri Defense Line. The Japanese weren't going to fight us on the beaches. They were going to let us land, let us advance, and then bleed us white in the most carefully prepared defensive positions in Pacific War history. For 3 days, we advanced south across the island with minimal resistance. The 1st Marine Division took the left flank, the 6th Marine Division the right, with 4 Army divisions, the 7th, 27th, 77th, and 96th Infantry, forming the center of our advance. By April 4th, we'd covered nearly a third of the island. Then we hit the Shuri line. I first realized we were in for a different kind of fight when we reached the outskirts of a village called Kakazu on the morning of April 4th. The terrain changed from rolling farmland to a nightmare landscape of coral ridges, deep ravines, and rocky escarpments. Every ridge was honeycombed with caves, tunnels, and concealed firing positions, whispered Danny Walsh, staring through his binoculars at the ridge line ahead. Look at that. Kakazu Ridge rose 300 feet above the valley floor, its coral face pocked with what looked like natural caves. But these weren't natural caves, they were carefully constructed defensive positions, reinforced with concrete and steel, connected by tunnels that allowed Japanese defenders to pop up anywhere along the ridge to fire, then disappear before we could return fire. The 96th Infantry Division attacked Kakazu Ridge on April 4th. I watched from our position 500 yards to the east as wave after wave of Army soldiers charged up the slope, only to be cut down by interlocking fields of machine gun fire from positions they couldn't even see. Japanese 6-inch mortars and 75mm artillery pieces, hidden in caves and camouflaged positions, rained shells on the attacking troops. By nightfall, the 96th had suffered over 400 casualties and gained exactly 0 yards. That's what we're up against, Captain Morrison told us during an evening briefing. Intelligence estimates the Japanese have fortified every ridge, every hill, every possible defensive position in southern Okinawa. They've had months to prepare, and they're not going to give up easy. That night, lying in my foxhole near Kakazu village, I began to understand what we'd gotten ourselves into. This wasn't going to be another quick victory like Guam or Saipan. The Japanese had learned from their previous defeats. Instead of dying gloriously in bonsai charges, they were going to make us pay for every yard of ground. The sound that woke me at 0545 on April 6 wasn't gunfire, it was aircraft engines. But these weren't American planes. High overhead, barely visible in the pre-dawn darkness, formations of Japanese aircraft were heading north toward our fleet. The largest kamikaze attack in history was about to begin. The Japanese called it Kikusui No. 1, Floating Chrysanthemum, part of Operation 10 Go, their desperate plan to destroy the American fleet off Okinawa using coordinated kamikaze attacks. What I witnessed that morning was 700 Japanese aircraft, fighters, bombers, even training planes, launched in waves against our ships. From my position on the ridge overlooking Hagushi Bay, I had a front-row seat to the most intense air-sea battle of World War II. The first wave of Kamikaze appeared just after dawn, about 50 planes flying in loose formation, heading straight for our transport area. Our combat air patrol, F-6F Hellcats and F-4U Corsairs from carriers USS Enterprise, USS Intrepid, and USS Yorktown, rose to meet them. The dogfights that followed were unlike anything I'd seen in 3 years of war. Japanese pilots, knowing they were going to die anyway, fought with absolute recklessness, ramming American fighters when they ran out of ammunition, diving their damaged planes at any American ship in range. There, 2 o'clock, Bobby Hernandez pointed toward a group of ships anchored about half a mile offshore. A Japanese Nakajima B5N Kate, torpedo bomber, trailing smoke from its engine, was diving toward the destroyer USS Coalhound. The ship's 5-inch and 40mm guns were firing constantly, filling the sky with black puffs of anti-aircraft fire. The Kate flew right through it, never wavering from its course. At the last second, the plane pulled up slightly, then dove straight into the destroyer's superstructure. The explosion was tremendous. The Coalhound disappeared in a ball of orange flame and black smoke. When the smoke cleared, the ship was listing heavily to port, its superstructure completely destroyed. Within minutes, it rolled over and sank. "My God," whispered Sergeant O'Connell, "they're sinking our ships." That was just the beginning. Throughout the morning and into the afternoon, wave after wave of Kamikaze attacked our fleet. The destroyer USS Bush was hit by 2 planes and sank. The destroyer USS Calhoun was hit and had to be scuttled. The battleship USS Maryland took a kamikaze hit that killed 53 sailors. Dozens of other ships were damaged. But it was the attack on the USS Laffey that showed me what American sailors were made of. The destroyer was on radar picket duty about 30 miles north of Okinawa when 22 Japanese planes attacked her simultaneously. For 80 minutes, the Laffey fought off kamikaze after kamikaze, her guns never stopping, her crew never giving up. I watched through binoculars as plane after plane dove at the ship. The Laffey's 5-inch guns shot down some, her 40mm and 20mm guns got others, but several planes got through. I counted at least 4 direct kamikaze hits and 3 near misses, but somehow the ship stayed afloat, her guns still firing. When it was over, the Laffey had shot down 9 Japanese planes and survived 4 kamikaze hits. 31 of her crew were dead and 72 wounded, but the ship was still fighting. If those sailors can take that kind of punishment and keep fighting, Captain Morrison told us that evening, then we can sure take whatever the Japanese throw at us on land. The next morning, April 7th, we got our first real taste of the Shuri Defense Line when the 1st Marine Division was ordered to attack a coral ridge called Wana Ridge, part of the outer defenses protecting the ancient Shuri Castle. The ridge was 200 feet high and maybe 800 yards long, running east-west across our axis of advance. From the top, Japanese observers could see everything we did and direct artillery fire on any movement in the valley below. We had to take it. At 0630 hours, the 1st Battalion, 5th Marines, my unit, began the attack. Our supporting weapons, 60mm mortars, 81mm mortars, and attached Sherman tanks, had been pounding the ridge for 2 hours, but as we'd learned at Kokuzu Ridge, you can't destroy positions built into solid coral with artillery alone. 1st Platoon takes the left, 2nd Platoon takes the right, Captain Morrison shouted over the sound of incoming artillery. 3rd Platoon in reserve. Move out. I was in 2nd Platoon, part of the squad led by Corporal Martinez. Our objective was a cluster of caves and fighting positions about halfway up the right side of the ridge. Intelligence said there might be a company of Japanese soldiers dug in there, maybe 150 men. Intelligence was wrong. There were at least 300. We made it about 50 yards up the slope before the Japanese opened fire. It started with a single rifle shot that dropped Tommy Chen, our barman, then erupted into a storm of machine gun fire, rifle fire, and grenades that seemed to come from everywhere at once. "Take cover!" Martinez screamed, but there wasn't much cover to take. The coral slope offered only small rocks and shallow depressions. Bullets ricocheted off the coral around us, sending chips flying like shrapnel. I pressed myself against a coral outcropping and tried to locate the Japanese firing positions. The problem was, I couldn't see them. The caves and fighting positions were so well camouflaged they were invisible until muzzle flashes gave them away, and by then it was too late. There, 10 o'clock, Bobby Hernandez pointed toward a cluster of rocks about 30 yards away. A Japanese machine gun was firing from what looked like solid stone, but I could see the muzzle flashes. I aimed my M1 at the flashes and fired all 8 rounds from my clip. The ping of the empty clip ejecting was almost lost in the sound of battle, but I reloaded automatically, muscle memory taking over while my brain tried to process the chaos around me. We were pinned down. Every time someone tried to move, Japanese rifles and machine guns opened up. Grenades started falling around us, not thrown, but fired from some kind of launcher hidden in the caves above. "We gotta get off this slope," Martinez shouted. "They're gonna kill us all." But we couldn't retreat. Captain Morrison was shouting orders from somewhere behind us, pushing more men up the slope. The attack had to succeed. Too much depended on it. That's when Private First Class Jacqueline Lucas from North Carolina did something that still gives me chills to remember. A Japanese grenade landed right in the middle of our position, maybe 3 feet from where Bobby Hernandez was lying. Without hesitation, Lucas threw himself on the grenade. The explosion lifted him 3 feet off the ground. By all rights, he should have been blown to pieces. But somehow, and I'll never understand how, he survived. The grenade had been a dud, Or maybe the coral absorbed most of the blast. Lucas was wounded, badly wounded, but alive. "Corpsman!" I screamed, and somehow Hospital Corpsman Robert Bush from Tacoma, Washington, made it up the slope under fire to treat Lucas. Bush worked on him for 10 minutes while bullets snapped overhead, then somehow managed to get Lucas back down the slope to the aid station. Lucas would later receive the Medal of Honor for that action, the youngest Marine ever to receive the award. We spent 4 hours on that slope, gaining maybe 30 yards. By 10:30 hours, we'd lost 12 men killed and 23 wounded, and we hadn't taken a single Japanese position. Captain Morrison finally called off the attack. "We'll try again tomorrow," he told us that evening as we dug in for the night, with more artillery, more air support. But I was beginning to realize that more artillery and air support weren't going to be enough. The Japanese had turned Okinawa into a fortress, and they were willing to die in it. By late April, after 3 weeks of bloody fighting, we'd advanced maybe 2 miles into the Shuri Defense Line. Every yard cost American lives. Every ridge, every hill, every village was a separate battle against enemies we rarely saw until they were dead. The worst of it was a place called the Maeda Escarpment, a 400-foot cliff that the Japanese had turned into a vertical fortress. Dozens of caves and tunnels riddled the cliff face. Spider holes and concealed positions covered every approach. The Japanese could fire down on us from positions we couldn't even see, let alone attack. The 77th Infantry Division had been battering themselves against the escarpment for a week when we were ordered to help. The 1st Battalion, 5th Marines would attack from the west, while the 307th Infantry Regiment attacked from the east. "This is the key to the whole Shuri line," Captain Morrison told us on April 25th. "Take the escarpment, and we can flank the rest of their positions. Fail, and we could be stuck here for months." The attack began at dawn on April 26th with the heaviest artillery barrage we'd fired since the landing. Every available gun, 155mm howitzers, 8-inch guns, even naval gunfire from offshore, pounded the cliff face for 2 hours. The noise was so loud it was painful. Chunks of coral the size of automobiles broke off the cliff and tumbled into the valley below. When the barrage lifted at 0800, we attacked. The Japanese let us get halfway up the slope before they opened fire. Then the cliff face erupted with muzzle flashes as hundreds of hidden positions revealed themselves. Machine guns, rifles, mortars, even anti-tank guns firing at individual soldiers. It was like charging into a steel wall. I made it about 100 yards before a mortar shell landed 10 feet away and knocked me flat. Shrapnel tore through my left shoulder and embedded in my helmet, but somehow I wasn't seriously hurt. I lay there for maybe 30 seconds, stunned, then heard Bobby Hernandez screaming. He was 20 feet away, caught in the open when the Japanese opened fire. A machine gun from somewhere up the cliff was shooting at him, bullets kicking up coral chips all around him. He was trying to crawl toward a boulder, but every time he moved, the gun fired again. Without thinking, I jumped up and ran toward him. A rifle bullet creased my thigh, another punched through my pack, but I made it to the boulder and dragged Bobby behind it. "Jimmy," he gasped. "I thought I was dead." "Not today," I told him, though privately I wasn't sure either of us was getting off that slope alive. The attack stalled after 2 hours. We'd gained maybe 50 yards and lost 40 men. The Japanese positions were too well concealed, too well protected. Artillery couldn't touch them, airstrikes couldn't reach them, and direct assault was suicide. That's when Private First Class Desmond Doss of the 77th Infantry Division did something that redefined courage for every man who witnessed it. Doss was a conscientious objector, a Seventh-day Adventist who refused to carry weapons but served as a medic. When the 2nd Battalion, 307th Infantry Regiment was cut to pieces trying to scale the escarpment on April 29th, Doss stayed on the cliff top to treat the wounded, even though Japanese soldiers were counterattacking all around him. For 5 hours, under constant enemy fire, Das lowered wounded soldiers down the cliff face, using a rope and pulley system he'd improvised. One by one, he found wounded Americans, treated their wounds, and lowered them to safety. "Lord, please help me get one more," he prayed before each rescue, according to survivors. By the end of the day, he'd saved 75 men. Das would receive the Medal of Honor for his actions on the Maeda Escarpment, the only conscientious objector to receive the award during World War II. It took us 11 days to capture the Maeda Escarpment. 11 days of attacks, counterattacks, cave fighting, and hand-to-hand combat. When we finally cleared the last Japanese position on May 6, we found a complex network of tunnels and caves that stretched for hundreds of yards into the cliff face. Some of the positions had concrete walls 3 feet thick. Others were connected by tunnels so elaborate they had electric lighting and ventilation systems. The Japanese hadn't just fortified Okinawa, they'd built an underground city designed for war. With the Maeda Escarpment in American hands, the outer ring of the Shuri Defense Line began to collapse. But General Ushijima wasn't finished yet. His final position was Shuri Castle itself, a 500-year-old fortress that dominated the southern end of Okinawa from atop a 500-foot hill. The Japanese had spent months turning the ancient castle into a modern fortress. The stone walls were reinforced with concrete and steel. Artillery positions were carved into the hillsides. The entire complex was connected by tunnels that allowed defenders to move unseen from position to position. On May 10, the 1st Marine Division was ordered to attack the castle from the west, while the 77th Infantry Division attacked from the east. It would be our final assault on the Shuri Line. But first, we had to cross the Dakeshi Ridge, a coral formation about half a mile west of the castle. Intelligence said it was lightly defended, maybe a reinforced platoon. Intelligence was wrong again. The ridge was held by the 32nd Regiment of the Japanese 24th Division, about 2,000 men in positions that had taken months to prepare. The attack that began on May 10 turned into a week-long nightmare of close-quarters combat in caves and tunnels. I'll never forget May 14. My squad was ordered to clear a series of caves on the north face of the ridge. We'd been fighting for 4 days, advancing maybe 50 yards per day, and we were all exhausted. Bobby Hernandez had been wounded by grenade fragments 2 days earlier, but refused evacuation. Danny Walsh had dysentery so bad he could barely walk, but he stayed with us. We were down to 18 men in a platoon that had started with 42. The caves were different from anything we'd encountered before. Instead of natural coral formations, these were carefully engineered positions with interconnecting tunnels, ventilation shafts, and multiple entrances. The Japanese could fire at us from one cave, then disappear into the tunnels and pop up 50 yards away. We were using a new tactic called blowtorch and corkscrew, flamethrowers to clear the caves, followed by demolition charges to seal them permanently. It was brutal, terrifying work that haunted the dreams of everyone who did it. Sergeant O'Connell was carrying the flamethrower, a massive M2-2 unit that weighed over 70 pounds fully loaded. The fuel tanks made him a prime target for Japanese snipers, but he never hesitated. He'd advance to within 15 feet of a cave mouth, then send a stream of burning napalm deep into the position. "Fire in the hole," he'd shout, then trigger a 3-second burst that turned the cave entrance into an inferno. The sound was horrible, not just the whoosh of igniting fuel, but the screams from inside the caves. After O'Connell cleared a cave with the flamethrower, Private Walsh would run forward with a satchel charge, 20 pounds of composition C2 explosive with a 10-second fuse. He'd throw the charge as deep into the cave as possible, then run for cover while the explosion collapsed the entrance and sealed any tunnels beyond. We cleared 12 caves that way on May 14th. It took us 8 hours, and we lost 3 men doing it, but by evening the north face of Dakeshi Ridge was secure. The Japanese counterattacked that night. At 0245 hours, I was awakened by the sound of movement in the rocks above our position. At first I thought it might be our own troops, but then I heard voices speaking Japanese. "Wake up! I hissed to Bobby Hernandez, who was sleeping in the foxhole next to mine. Japs! The attack came from 3 directions at once. Japanese soldiers, many of them wounded survivors from the caves we'd sealed, charged our positions with rifles, grenades, and samurai swords. In the darkness, lit only by muzzle flashes and exploding grenades, it was impossible to tell friend from enemy. A Japanese soldier appeared at the edge of my foxhole, silhouetted against the stars. I fired 3 rounds from my M1, hitting him in the chest, and he toppled backward. But 2 more took his place, and I could hear fighting all along our line. "Banzai!" someone screamed in Japanese, followed by the distinctive crack of a Japanese Arisaka rifle. A grenade exploded 20 feet away, sending coral chips rattling off my helmet. The fighting lasted 2 hours. When dawn came, we counted 37 dead Japanese soldiers in and around our positions. We'd lost 5 men killed and 11 wounded, but we'd held the ridge. On May 21st, patrols from the 1st Marine Division entered the ruins of Shuri Castle. The Japanese had withdrawn during the night, abandoning the position that had anchored their defense line for 6 weeks. But they weren't retreating, they were falling back to their final defensive positions in the rugged hills of southern Okinawa. The worst was yet to come. With the fall of Shuri Castle, General Ushijima withdrew his remaining forces, maybe 50,000 men, to the Kiyan Peninsula at the southern tip of Okinawa. The terrain there was even worse than the Shuri line: coral cliffs, deep ravines, and rocky hills honeycombed with caves and tunnels. But there was something else that made the final phase of the Okinawa campaign different from everything that had come before: civilians. Up to this point, we'd encountered very few Okinawan civilians. Most had either fled to the hills or were being held in Japanese-controlled areas. But as we advanced into southern Okinawa, we began to find them everywhere, in caves, in destroyed villages, hiding in the ruins of their homes. Many were terrified of us. Japanese propaganda had told them that Americans would torture and kill any civilians they captured. Some committed suicide rather than surrender. Others attacked our troops with improvised weapons. It was heartbreaking and terrifying at the same time. On May 28th, my squad was ordered to clear a village called Misato, about 3 miles north of the final Japanese positions. Intelligence said it was unoccupied, but as we moved through the destroyed houses, we began finding civilians. The first was an elderly man hiding in the ruins of what had been a shop. He was clearly terrified, shaking and crying when Bobby Hernandez found him crouched behind some rubble. Bobby spoke a little Japanese. He'd learned some working in San Francisco before the war, and managed to calm the old man down enough to get him to surrender. "He says there are more," Bobby told me. "Families hiding in the caves behind the village. He says they're afraid we'll kill them." We spent 3 hours coaxing civilians out of their hiding places. 37 people in all, old men, women, children, even babies. They were all starving, many wounded, all convinced they were going to die. Hospital Corpsman Bush, who'd been patching up Marines for 2 months, immediately went to work treating the wounded civilians. He used our medical supplies we might need for our own wounded, without hesitation. "They're people," he said when Sergeant O'Connell questioned using American medical supplies on enemy civilians. "Scared, hungry people who've been caught in the middle of this war. We help people, that's what we do." It was incidents like this that made the final phase of Okinawa so difficult. We were fighting an enemy that had proven they would die rather than surrender, but we were also trying to protect civilian populations that had been caught in the middle of the war. The final major action I participated in was the assault on Hill 89, one of the last Japanese strongholds on the Kiyan Peninsula. By June 15th, the 1st Marine Division had been fighting for over 2 months. We'd lost nearly 8,000 men killed and wounded. The survivors were exhausted, many suffering from combat fatigue, dysentery, and tropical diseases. But we were close to the end. Japanese resistance was weakening. Prisoners, the first we'd taken in significant numbers, told us that ammunition was running low, that many Japanese positions were being defended by walking wounded. Hill 89 rose about 300 feet above the coastal plain, offering commanding views of the final Japanese positions around Mabuni. If we could take it, we could direct artillery fire on the remaining enemy strongholds and end the organized resistance on Okinawa. The 3rd Battalion, 5th Marines had been trying to take the hill for 3 days when we were ordered to relieve them on June 15th. They'd gotten about halfway up the slope, but had been stopped by a complex of caves and fighting positions near the summit. Same thing we've been doing for 2 months, Captain Morrison told us during the briefing. Flamethrowers, demolitions, and riflemen. Clear the caves, seal the tunnels, move on to the next position. But be careful, intelligence says General Ushijima himself might be up there. The attack began at 0700 on June 16th. By now, we had the tactics down to a science. Artillery and mortar fire would pound the Japanese positions for 30 minutes. Then our riflemen would advance under covering fire from machine guns and bars, while flamethrower teams moved up to clear the caves. But something was different about Hill 89. The Japanese positions were more elaborate, more strongly held than anything we'd encountered. The caves weren't just fighting positions, they were underground command posts with concrete walls, steel doors, and ventilation systems that allowed the defenders to survive direct hits from artillery shells. We fought for 3 days to take that hill, 3 days of cave-to-cave combat, often hand-to-hand fighting in tunnels barely wide enough for one man. The Japanese fought with a desperation we hadn't seen since the early days of the campaign, using everything from rifles and grenades to samurai swords and sharpened bamboo spears. On the morning of June 18th, we found out why they'd fought so hard. In a deep cave near the summit, we discovered the bodies of General Ushijima and his chief of staff, Lieutenant General Isamu Cho. They'd committed ritual suicide seppuku, rather.